بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نحمدك في السراء والضراء وفي الشدة والرخاء كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك الكريم ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين اللهم صل على
محمد وآل محمد.
السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت بقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Sisters and brothers, السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم القائم المهدي من ولدي اسمه اسمي وكنيته كنيتي أشبه الناس بي خلقا وخلقا. The returning Imam is from my progeny. He has the same name and epithet as myself, and he is the closest person to me on both physical and moral traits. Last night, I presented a theme about Quran, the importance of Quran, the critical role that Quran plays in forming and shaping the Muslim society. And I stated that Muslims in general do not disagree about the importance and the role of Quran in their lives, even if we disagree on the interpretation of few verses or chapters. However, despite the sacredness of the Quran, as I explained last night, we are seeing more and more frequent events around the world in which Quran has become, or Quran burning, or desecration of Quran has become the means by irritating Muslims, disrespecting their opinion about their faith, and particularly the importance of Quran in their life. And I also stated that as Muslims, if we want to do anything about it, we really need to understand the dynamics of the legal paradigm that exists, and every country, every political establishment immediately hides behind it. They may agree with it, they definitely agree with it, but they are not coming out to say that we agree with it. They say it's legal. As I stated last night, when the criticism piled up against the Swedish government from Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Gulf State, Syria, Lebanon, and others, the only answer that came from the Swedish government was, it's legal. We regret it. It's regrettable, but it's legal. Hiding behind the freedom of expression or freedom of speech. Although this freedom of speech and freedom of expression has been curtailed and limited vis-a-vis, say, the Jewish community or some other Christian communities, but they have been able to go to the legal system, to parliament and so on, through lobbies, establish a law that would consider this as a hate crime or something similar to it. Muslims are trying now, Muslim lawyers are trying to go to court in Sweden and other countries to see whether they can use the same, at least prevented under the legal hate speech. Whether they will succeed, certainly it's not a law yet, but this is something that we can do. And here in this country, we really need to collaborate with other institutions, other groups, lobbies, that they have sensitivities similar to ours in establishing some kind of limitation within the court. At the end, there was a critique that went to all of us, all parents, all Muslims, that we are not doing justice to Quran. Despite the fact that emotionally we get upset, we stand up and we criticize those who insult Quran. That should be there. But the main ethos of bringing Quran into our lives is absent. We are not paying attention to it. The parents might come from parts of the world where Arabic is easy for them, or either they have learned it or it's been native language. But their children, our children, they grow up in this country nothing about Arabic language. Even sometimes they come to my office and they say, Maulana, I find it very difficult to recite Hamd and Surah if I have no clue what I'm saying. Particularly those who intend to live in this country, be mindful of the fact that the kids are going through a difficult challenge, a difficult time, and the shape and form of society is such, particularly during the early age of their life, where child psychologists consider them to be an open box. An open box means that they are susceptible to all kinds of publicity, marketing, ideas, and so on. This is why you see focus on the children during this particular first phase of their life, as Quran says. So this is something critical for us that we really need to pay attention to. Tonight, I want to go back to the theme that I ended up with before this discussion about the Quran. Discussion about the Quran can continue from even if a month is given, one could go through various ideas and themes about the Quran that we can discuss. But tonight I want to go back to Imam al-Mahdi and Qiyam al-Mahdi and the uprising. If you remember at the time where we were discussing about correlation between Qiyam Karbala, Thawrat Karbala, and Qiyam al-Mahdi, there were some similarities and common ground between the two that we discussed. One of the ahadith that we have, we have from the Holy Prophet as well as other Imams, is the notion of the fact that first of all, it is non-negotiable, it's going to happen. One day it's going to happen. We don't know when, but it's going to happen. لو لم يبق من الدهر إلا يوم لبعث الله رجلا من أهل بيتي يملأها قسطا وعدلا كما ملئت جورا وظلما. Even if it is just one day left of the life of the earth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to prolong this day, and until a person will come from my descent, من أهل بيتي يملأها قسطا وعدلا كما ملئت جورا وظلما. This hadith in itself has caused a huge amount of problem. Immediately after the beginning of the long occultation. The period of long occultation, which started around 300 and early part of the 300, early the fourth century, 330 after Hijrah, caused huge amount of turbulence and destabilization within the Shia community. For the simple reason, the Shia identity is associated directly with the presence of the Imam. Without Imamah, there is no Shia. Shia suddenly faced a reality that Imam is no longer accessible. How they are going to define themselves? Now that the Imam is not there, who are we? What's the challenge? That's number one. Number two, this notion of, okay, in the absence of the Imam, on the political or at least authority point of view, who's going to take charge of the community? And what are we as ordinary people are supposed to be in the absence, to do in the absence of the Imam? What are our responsibilities? This hadith that says, كَمَا مُلِئَتْ جَوْرًا وَظُلْمًا, added more confusion. There are a number of questions that appeared at the time with the Shia community that they began to ask themselves. What should we do? The hadith here, Intedhaar, that we have to wait. But during the period of Intedhaar, are we supposed to be operating under the paradigm that Quran has defined for us? That clearly states that لَيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ, we as people are supposed to be working for justice and peace on earth? Or we are operating under a different paradigm, which is this مُلِئَتْ ظُلْمًا وَجَوْرًا, that until the earth is going to be filled with injustice and evil. Should we support Harakat al-Islah? This is the reform movement in our society, and move towards justice within the society, and naturally operating within the law that the paradigm that Quran has defined for us, that we have to work for justice. If we do that, then that is going to prolong the coming back of the Imam. This is the conception that they have. You see it in the literature. That it's going to prolong the coming back of the Imam because we are not allowing injustice and tyranny to take over the world. So there is a paradox. Either we have to sit and do nothing, which is the negative intedhaar, do nothing and wait for injustice to take over, and evil to take over, and this by default will speed up the process of the Imam coming back. It might appear to us when we think about it unthinkable, but this was the argument that was being presented at the time. It's the period of turbulence. Imam is not there, people have a number of questions, and these questions really challenge the foundation of the Shia theology, fiqh, and everything else. Shaykh Nu'mani, in a book, one of the early scholars of that period, in a book called Intedhaar, chastises the Shia community for drifting away from Ahlul Bayt and the right path, and moving towards some other isms, theological isms, because they could not understand what are our roles. Imam is no longer here. Who is supposed to take over the leadership of the community? Even the hadith from Imam Hassan al-Askari that says, in the absence of the Imam, you have to go to the scholars that qualify, and Imam makes a list of the qualification for the scholars. The debate started. Is their role and responsibilities purely in the context of collecting the dues from the community, and that's it? and they have no other authority in the political, economics and others, or no, they have an authority in leading the society as well. And this was the Wilayat Faqih concept that Imam Khomeini rahmatullahi brought into, at least in Iran, and was the impetus for the Islamic Revolution, is something that existed many decades, if not centuries ago, that debate, alaykum salam. So Shia drifted, confused. Imam is no longer there. At least during the short occultation, you had 4 individuals that you could go to and say, I have a problem. You have access to the Imam, you go and find the answers for me. And they did. Now that the 4 direct disciples that had access to Imam died, and Imam terminated any more allowing any disciples to come in. What's the role of the Muslim community? Who's going to lead them? That's one of the challenge. Now, we have a number of ahadith from the holy Imams. أفضل أعمال أمتي انتظار الفرج. أفضل جهاد أمتي انتظار الفرج. Waiting for the end and the return of the Imam is considered to be the best jihad or the best deed. فإن أحب الأعمال إلى الله انتظار الفرج. And the list of ahadith regarding waiting, intidhar, goes on. You can go and pick up any book about the life of Prophet Mahdi, Imam al-Mahdi, Ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-Sharif, and you see all these ahadith about intidhar. The concept of intidhar wasn't clear, because people had to deal with this paradoxical position that they are in. We know Quran is telling us in Surah Al-Hadid, verse 25, that we have sent messengers with a clear guidance so that people stand up for justice or attain justice. Does this law, this paradigm, this obligation, this command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still applies or not? How do we interpret the concept of intidhar, that we have to wait for the return? Is it going to happen miraculously? Which is, those of you who are familiar with the Christian understanding of things, the concept of rapture. Concept of rapture says that you don't need to do anything. You can abuse the world as much as you want. Once the Messiah returns, everything miraculously is going to be turned to the level of purity. So these people were saying, are we supposed to do nothing and simply wait for the Imam to return to fix things? Or are we supposed to operate under the paradigm of Surah Al-Hadid, verse 25, لِيَقُومَ النَّاسِ بِالْقِسْطِ, so that we stand for justice. Now, if we stand for justice, by default, it delays the coming back of the Imam, because it does not allow injustice to take over the world, as the hadith says, كَمَا مُلِئَتْ جَوْرًا وَظُلْمًا. It needs to fill with injustice before the Imam comes back. So any act that delays it, delays the return of the Imam. And if we are going to act under speeding up, stay back, do nothing, allow injustice to take over, then what is our obligation vis-a-vis the verse in the Holy Quran? Few ideas developed and answering this paradox. There are those who said quite clearly, and even today there are some scholars, that they say during the absence of the Imam, we are not supposed to do anything and simply wait. You don't challenge injustice, you don't challenge tyranny. Even during the early part of the revolution in Iran, or even in Iraq, during the time of Shaykh Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, the pacifist scholars were criticizing them that you shouldn't do anything, you should wait for the Imam to fix it. So those who believe in the intedhaar, waiting, in the negative sense, al-intedhaar al-salbi, they say you don't need to do anything. Amr bil-ma'ruf has to be shut down, because any act or action by us as human beings in challenging the established order, the tyrannical ruler, by default is going to lead to the prolongment and the delay of coming back of the Imam. This is one view. The others said, no, we're still obligated, we're still obligated to operate under the command of the Holy Quran to stand up for justice. We leave the notion of coming back of the Imam in the hand of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So each one has a problem. Those who say we operate under the negative intedhaar, how do they respond to the commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you have to fight for justice? Those who say on the commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the notion of how do we interpret that the earth has to be full. The third view that says no, I think the problem is that we have not understood the hadith correctly. Part of the misconception that exists, that it finds it very difficult to tally between these two, the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the intedhaar, is what we call the linear approach. The linear approach that says that the earth has to be full or filled with injustice first before we get to the issue of justice and so on. These scholars, they say it's a misconception here. There is a verse in the Holy Quran that clearly states وَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا انشراح فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. Usr and Yusr, they are not linear process, they work together. The world is now full of injustice and there is an opportunity for justice. Both of them. Intedhaar that we have, that so many ahadith from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir and others that they talk about, is nothing but a period of training in preparation for when the Imam comes back. Only the elite and the select from those, imagine you are going to go for a battle and you're going to organize a battalion, a platoon, and this platoon has to be crack team. What do? You bring all the soldiers together and you pick individuals that are ready for this. Yesterday, the Israeli army showed a video in southern Lebanon, just on the border with occupied Palestine. In the shadows of trees, there were Hezbollah fighters stealthily walking around. It set shivers in the back of the Israelis, and now the entire newspapers and media is talking about it. That this is a crack team has come exactly on the border. Only the select. If Imam is going to come back, he needs a group of people that are going to stand with him and work with him and establish justice. People who spiritually and physically are not ready, they are not going to be chosen. So period of intedhaar, as the hadith says, that the people in this period, they are supposed to cleanse, from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, to cleanse themselves, purify themselves, and be ready for the day. If you do whatever you're supposed to do, and you don't make it, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to grant you the privilege. In Dua al-Ahd that we recite every morning, read it. We are part of the dua. It says that, O Lord, if death separates me from the return of Al-Mahdi. Please give me that privilege of waking up, rising, and being able to be among those who would support it. Only the elite. So between now and then, you really need to work as hard as possible. The concept of Intedhaar is not shutting down the commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The concept of Intedhaar is a dynamic act, dynamic state of mind that says that you really need to work hard and prepare yourself for, in case it happens during your time. There are a number of ahadith. عليكم بالتسليم والرد إلينا وانتظار أمرنا وأمركم وفرجنا وفرجكم بالورع والتواضع. How do you prepare yourself? Mentally, you prepare yourself by being humble and becoming God conscious, staying away from sinfulness, purifying yourself, being ready in case the time comes. Why? Because the idea that we have to allow injustice to take over in a linear manner, interpretation of history, and then justice to come over, it's false. In the discussion that we had a few nights ago, I think it was last week, regarding every time has its own pharaohs and at the same time its own Imam of the day. Because conflict between Haqq and Batil is a perpetual one. It's not something that's unique to the time of the 12th Imam. If that's the case, we are going through that process now. Another thing that we need to be mindful of, there is a misconception regarding where is Imam Zaman. There are those who say there is a green island somewhere far away from civilization and he's taking recluse, sitting over there waiting for the command of Allah to come. Far from reality. Imam is with us. We don't see him. It's the veil in front of our eyes. But he sees us. He supervises all our deeds. He watches what we do. According to the hadith, every morning and every evening, the a'mal of the Shia of Ahlul Bayt are presented to the Imams and to Ahlul Bayt. Hear exactly what they have done, every one of us. This is why the hadith says, watch. Because if at the end of the day your a'mal is presented to the Imam and is full of sin, what justifications do we have? Imam is watching over us. The conflict of Haqq and Batil and evil as well as justice is constantly going on. Just look at the world around us. You don't need to go outside the United States, just look at the United States. Morally corrupt, ethically devoid of any ethical principle. What is our duty now? Do we shut down the command of Quran that says you have to work and fight for justice? No. Yes, there are people, huge number of people that they say it's nothing to do with us. Let the Imam come. Because if we don't do it, then our children are going to suffer next. Professor Zim, in one of his books, talks about it's totally irrational to be silent in front of a runaway train. You have to do something. The corruption of the society and everything else obligates us to react. And if we would ask what Imam asked one day, that you had every opportunity to do something when you didn't, what's the answer? Intedhaar means using the period that we have in front of us to purify ourselves, get ready mentally, spiritually, physically, as well as everything else, religiously, morally, ethically, ready for that occasion, in case it happens. But at the same time, be mindful of the command of the Holy Quran regarding establishment of justice, and be mindful of the world, the way it's unpacking itself, it's moving towards injustice. This is the concept of intidhar that we have so many ahadith. أفضل العبادة انتظار الفرج. Then it makes sense. It's more active. أفضل أعمال أمتي انتظار الفرج. And a number of others, other ahadith that we have regarding intidhar. Quite a number of books written about the concept of intidhar in at least أفضل جهاد أمتي انتظار الفرج, etc., etc. You can go to any sites and you can find out these books available for you to read if you have a chance. Understand the concept of intidhar. Concept of intidhar is not a concept that removes responsibility from us and puts it in some obscure time to somebody else. We all have responsibility now. How do we react? That's a different story. And the hadith from Imam Muhammad al-Baqir defines, it says, those who are actively in intidhar, التسليم لأمرنا والورع والتواضع وانتظار القائم. They all go together. So you have to look at this period as a period of purification and getting ready. Mindful of all your Quranic command and responsibility, as well as the fact that you live in a society, corruption and injustice is prevailing everywhere. May Allah protect us in the coming years, or give us the opportunity to be able to understand our role and responsibility within the society. Sometimes one regrets coming to this country and living here, generally speaking, in the West. When we look at the challenges, we sit with our children and they tell you what challenges and difficulties they have to go through. At least we had the base and foundation that to a degree supported us. But what about them? God bless his soul, Dr. Karim Siddiqui, who used to be the head of the Muslim Parliament in London in the 1980s, died late 1980. At the time decided, and this is 1980 England, not America, decided to do a survey and see the effect of what he called, those days there were no religious schools or chartered schools or anything available. It was just a state school in London or in England. Decided to establish the effect of secular school on the mind of the Muslim children. Extensive survey, right across from southern part of England to the north. A report came out, and I read that report. One thing that stuck out in my mind, for every hour that the child spends in a public school, parents need 2 hours to wash their brain of what is going on over there. And the first question is, who has 16 hours to give to the children? So we are running to stand still. Our children are at a disadvantage, particularly if we have no plan. Remember the hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen, at least parents that have children here. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, prepare your children, bring them up for a period that you are not going to be around. What does that mean? Give them the fundamental principle and make them give them a strong foundation, and work with them so that they develop the strategy of how to use this during the time that you are not around. we constantly go to work, come back home, sit on the sofa, and do nothing about our children and buy gadgets for our children to do whatever they want, what chance do they have? We will be asked. If they drift from the right path, it's due to the fact that we have failed them. May Allah protect us, protect all of us. Let's end with Dua al-Manjib again, as people have asked for it, for people who are sick and ill and they need our prayers. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 أما اللهم إنا نسألك وندعوك باسمك العلي الأعظم بفاطمة وأبوها وبعدها وبنوها أن تفرج عنا فرجا عاجلا يا الله. اللهم اشف مرضانا واغفر أمواتنا واقض حوائجنا واجعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية أهل البيت عليهم السلام وعجل في فرج مولانا صاحب الزمان بالنبي وآله. الفاتحة مع الصلوات.